All right, so today we're going to dive into the birth of the American environmental movement. And what's so fascinating is that it wasn't just one simple idea. Nope, it was really a clash of huge competing philosophies that, believe it or not, still shape how we think about nature today. And this right here, this single sentence gets to the absolute heart of the problem. Was nature this sacred temple that we should leave totally untouched? Or was it just a big collection of resources for us to manage and use? This one question, it would split the movement's founders right down the middle and set the stage for a century of debate. But before any movement could even get started, there had to be a crisis. And to really get why people were so fired up, we have to take a look at the world they were living in, the Gilded Age. So picture late 19th century America. It was an era of just explosive progress. Railroads were stitching the continent together, factories were churning out all kinds of new stuff, and cities were growing at this unbelievable rate. It really must have felt like a golden age of limitless opportunity. But, and this is a huge but, all of that progress came at a staggering cost. The very same industrial engine that was building the country was also, quite literally, tearing it apart. The scale of the damage was something the world had just never seen before. I mean, the cost of this so-called progress was just jaw-dropping. We're talking about the American bison, which once numbered in the tens of millions, being hunted to the very brink of extinction. Entire forests, gone, wiped out, and huge industrial plants were just dumping their waste directly into rivers, poisoning the water for whole communities. This was the wounded landscape that a new generation of reformers was looking at, thinking, we have to do something. So, in response to this full-blown crisis, two major and competing visions started to emerge. Now, both sides wanted to protect the environment, but they had totally different ideas about how to do it, and more importantly, why. Okay, so this is where you can really see that divided soul we're talking about. In one corner, you've got preservation. This view saw nature as having this deep spiritual value. It was like a cathedral that needed to be protected from humanity. And in the other corner, you had conservation, a much more practical approach that saw nature as a set of resources to be managed scientifically for our long-term benefit. The champion of the preservationists was, of course, John Muir, the founder of the Sierra Club. In this quote, it just perfectly captures his whole philosophy. He argued that nature wasn't just a warehouse full of timber and minerals, it was something that fed the human soul. For Muir, a pristine valley was every bit as essential to being human as a loaf of bread. And then leading the charge for the conservationists was Gifford Pinchot, the first ever head of the U.S. Forest Service. His whole thing was about efficiency and preventing waste. It was all summed up in his goal of the greatest good for the greatest number in the long run. So for Pinchot, the idea of just locking up resources and leaving them untouched, that was the very definition of being wasteful. Now, this philosophical fight, it wasn't just some abstract academic debate. Oh no. It came to a very dramatic, very real climax in a battle over one of America's most beautiful landscapes. So here's the setup. The city of San Francisco was booming, and it desperately needed a reliable source of water. Engineers looked around and identified the Hetch Hetchy Valley as the absolute perfect spot to build a dam and create a massive reservoir. There was just one tiny little problem. Hetch Hetchy was part of Yosemite National Park. And suddenly, the debate was on. It pitted the very real needs of a modern city directly against the ideal of preserving a wilderness sanctuary. This became the ultimate test case, the battle for America's environmental soul. For John Muir and the preservationists, this whole idea was basically sacrilege. They saw Hetch Hetchy as a twin to the world-famous Yosemite Valley, a stunning, glacial-carved wonderland. To them, flooding it would be like tearing down a magnificent cathedral just to use it as a water tank. But in the end, Gifford Pinchot and the conservationists won the argument. In 1913, Congress gave the project the green light. The dam was built, the valley was drowned, and it became a reservoir. The greatest good for the greatest number was decided to be water for a city. That vision won out. But it would be a huge mistake to think this whole movement was just about Muir and Pinchot arguing over faraway valleys. The story was so much richer from that, and it touched the lives of everyday people, in the cities and in the countryside. That conservationist ideal, it sounds pretty noble, doesn't it? But in practice, the benefits weren't always shared equally. A lot of the new policies that came out of it had these hidden social and class divides, and they definitely created winners and losers. Let's just take Pennsylvania as an example. New game laws were passed to protect wildlife. Sounds good, right? Well, they had some pretty uneven consequences. Requiring expensive firearm permits hit poor, non-citizen immigrants really hard. Banning all hunting on Sunday, which was the only day off for many minors, cut them off from a critical source of food for their families. And banning the hunting of songbirds, that directly targeted a traditional food for Italian-American families. The greatest good suddenly didn't feel so great for them. And this fight for the environment was happening all over the place, way beyond the national parks. In the crowded cities, you had social reformers like Jane Addams fighting for clean water and better sanitation, arguing that a healthy environment was a basic human right. Out in the countryside, the country life movement was trying to promote more sustainable farming. And in schools, a new nature study movement started taking kids outdoors just to help them build a connection to the natural world. But maybe nothing shows the power of regular citizens better than the story of the passenger pigeon. This was a bird that once numbered in the billions. And then, through overhunting, it was just gone. Forever. That shocking loss galvanized people, especially women. Members of the Audubon Society organized to shame the fashion industry for using bird feathers on hats. It was a powerful consumer movement that led directly to some of our first landmark wildlife protection laws. So what do we take away from all this? From this chaotic, foundational, and frankly conflicted era of American environmentalism? Well, ultimately, the movement was born with this fundamental tension right at its very core. That conflict between preserving nature for its own sake and conserving it for our own use was never really settled, and that divided soul became its defining feature, its story, really. And that leaves us wrestling with the exact same question they were asking over 100 years ago. It's a question that echoes in every single debate we have today, whether it's about building a wind farm in a beautiful landscape or drilling for oil in a wildlife refuge. Is nature for beauty, or is it for bread? Is it for a spiritual escape or for efficient resources? Is it for everyone, or is it just for some of us? This question is the enduring legacy of the movement's founders, and it's one we are all still trying to answer.